just look at it and we'll...
Abstain.
Thanks, Mark.
Okay, it's
Did
live.
you turn the mics on or
Yep.
whatever?
Ms. Shaw,
Thanks.
Yeah.
Ms. Kennison,
Yeah.
Right.
are there any other board members who have joined the call that I didn't mention?
Is he even on?
And that is everybody.
Thank you, Julian. Okay, the minutes have been approved. Thank you. We'll move on to the fifth item on the agenda, and that is the town of Sprague. We have an update that was provided to you in your packet, and the next meeting is scheduled for May, just so you're all aware. At that point, we're going to then look to possibly have a special meeting beforehand, but I just wanted to bring that to folks' attention. Julian has an update on the meeting that took place, and he will then give us an update as far as the audit was presented at that meeting. Julian, would you like to provide an overview from your write-up?
Sure. The meeting in March was actually the first meeting of the subcommittee in quite a while. We reviewed the FY20 audit, and the highlights are included in the brief write-up. The town did eliminate much of the general fund deficit from the prior year. There's just a little bit in the red at this point, or as of June 30th, 20, at $48,000 negative fund balance. And there is a deficit that continues in the capital non-recurring fund, and that was actually related to one new finding in the audit dealing with budgetary controls over capital expenditures. The town will be developing a policy and procedures for addressing that. 3 findings were closed out in the audit. 3 have carried over. 2 of which are one has been resolved, one is nearing resolution, and then the last may actually take another year or more. That one revolves around a comprehensive set of policies and procedures, and the town has a 2-year plan, or had a 2-year plan to essentially complete that task. Then we also do the Board of Education budget for FY22. That budget, as proposed, increases just shy of $100,000. It's within the range that was included as for assumption purposes in the 5-year plan, and we will continue our the next meeting of the subcommittee will likely be a special meeting in April to review a proposed budget which would be the Board of Finance proposed budget. We don't have a date yet, waiting on the town to develop and provide us with a budget adoption calendar, so that is just something to have on your radar screen. We will be trying to schedule a meeting hopefully pretty soon if we're looking to approve a budget in May. And that is what we covered the Sprague subcommittee.
Thank you. So at this point, I'd like to discuss the monthly financial reports, unless somebody has some questions on the audit side of life for the town or the high level of the budget, but otherwise we can then move on to the monthly update. Or unless the town would like to also provide any additional feedback regarding their financial statements. Sorry, Tom.
Yeah, we wanted a little more background on the deficit in the capital non-recurring fund. I'm not a member of the subcommittee. I don't belabor it, but I'd just like to understand a little bit more clearly how that occurred. I don't know if that's Julian or someone from the town of Sprague.
I'm going to let the town take the lead on that.
Okay, the deficit in the capital non-recurring fund occurred with overages on projects that were not funded, and there were no funds for, so the general fund paid for them. And additionally, there were unbudgeted, unapproved items that were paid for out of that area, so that put us in a further deficit.
This has been a practice, Tom, that has been ongoing, where they would have little overages, so it has built up. And this past year was an additional amount that was not covered within the budget, correct, Cheryl?
That is correct. It was an additional amount that was not approved through the proper channels and was taken from that account. But they were able to cover it.
And how much did that deficit grow for last fiscal year, 1920?
Was that like 100,000?
It was around 100,000, probably slightly more than that. I think it might have been 150,000.
And is the capital non-recurring fund under budgetary control? Is it on your general ledger? And do you have a budget established for your projects that you're running through that fund?
Well, currently we don't have any projects that we are running through that fund. And I don't believe it's on the general ledger in particular. There are breakdowns of the projects in there, whatever the projects were. And there are reports that go out, to the Board of Finance monthly for that.
Okay, well, I don't want to belabor the point, but it sounds like there's some follow-up there that, I guess at this point, if you have a deficit in the fund, unless you've got new money coming into your capital non-recurring fund from some source, you really shouldn't be running any activity whatsoever through it, and you really need to put together a plan on how to, fund that shortfall, if you will.
But I feel like
But I don't belabor it, so.
And I totally agree with you. We are not actually, this is something that occurred in the previous administration and is not occurring now.
Let's hope so.
So the expenditures aren't happening unless they are funded. And we are trying to look at a plan that we can,
Usually I get the screen where it shows all the squares, like squares, but
offset that
I can't get,
deficit.
this Teams one, I don't have a lot of experience with. Really? I'm doing all the other.
This is a material weakness finding, so it definitely it will be on all of our radar.
And make it worse.
Okay, great, thank you.
Otherwise I give you a
It's
hand.
pretty easy, but.
I haven't had trouble.
Any other questions regarding the audit?
I can keep up with it, but I can't see all the people, I can only see the person talking. Whereas all the other ones show like 9 or 10, 12.
All right, then let's move on to your monthly update, status update.
Full screen, which only makes it bigger.
With our monthly update, at the end of February, the
I don't know where it's this stuff
revenues
and
were
everything.
slightly lower year over year due to the deferment of the taxes. But just not on this report, but just to give you the information that by the end of March, we are at par where we were last March, so that has caught up, and so we are right, pretty much even on the tax collection
Show
rate.
participants.
All of the invoices are at 30 days or less, which we are working to keep them at that and actually chip away to get, down to be able to be current with everything. And all of the expenditures are on track year over year on a par with what they were last year.
So, Michael, just so you know, they did transfer enough money to take care of that
Happy to have
mill
any
rate
questions
thing.
that
That's
anyone
not why
might
they
have
did it.
about them.
We put $350 into the unfunded pension line item.
Any questions on the budget for the members?
For OPEB to start with last night.
And so did the mill rate have to go up?
Yes,
Like
it went to
$400,000?
Yes, it went to 11 point. I had it.
Okay.
It
I
was-
could figure it out.
Frank, no, here, I can tell you. Because Frank did.
No
one
questions
scenario.
regarding the monthly update here?
It was, so we did the most, so it's 11.62. So we're still down, what, 4.5%.
Is the board of ed on the line? I know that,
But it fixes the 45 mil problem.
Fixes that.
I'm here, Bill,
I'm gonna see the fire chiefs tomorrow.
Yeah, okay.
It appears as
So
though,
let's just provide for the board the projections that you have for, I know that your projections are built into the regular monthly, but we have included the financials there and what you're projecting for the end of the year.
Well, you know what it is though?
We are projecting a reserve of about $160,000.
It's when he said something about.
We do have a little bit of a deficit in tuition and transportation, but anticipate that overall we will have a reserve.
If you could go help them because.
yeah,
We saw a
and I'll
small
put that
reserve
illustration
and
so
located
you
with
can
our
see
salary
exactly
and substitute
what
line.
happens and what is happening, and I got the statute for it too.
And
Yeah, they're gonna go under.
Okay, do you have a lot of
I think it
vacancies?
just means if they do, they'll have to.
We have a lot of turnover this year with our paraprofessionals and our daily
Yeah,
staff.
well, at least thank you.
And we just didn't fill some
Because I think we
positions,
gotta have
so
The chief was definitely all on board with it last.
we were able to just cover it internally.
I talked to him earlier in the day.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you.
I just wanted to
Any
see
questions for
the
the board?
reality of how things fluctuate.
Well, it's still that way. People are trying to say there's gonna be more tax increase, no one to.
All right, I don't see any. Then we can move on to the next item on the agenda. Thank you, Sprague. Wait a minute. Yeah.
You wanted to have with that image set up.
Yep, thank you, Tom Sprague. We can then move on to the next item, which is the town of West Haven.
Oh, shit.
Thank you.
I never got it.
Okay, but I mean,
Could just be a sales.
good morning, everyone. West Haven's here.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Well, good morning.
I have the mayor and Michael Mylone, Frank Chaplinsky, and Lee Tiernan.
Hi.
Okay, thank
Good
you.
morning.
Hello, Michael.
Hi.
So the first item on our agenda today for the town is a subcommittee update, and Julian has provided a write-up in the packet, and Julian, you want to give an overview of what occurred at the subcommittee level?
The bulk of the conversation had to do with an item that's on this agenda, which is the FY22 budget, so I won't go into detail on that, other than to say that the subcommittee reviewed the mayor's recommended budget and did provide some feedback, and we did compile the feedback and observations into a summary document that was included with the budget materials that went out for this meeting. And then the city also announced that they've gone live with the ADP system. I believe the Board of Ed had maybe another payroll cycle before they were going live, and I believe they are live now, but we can get an update on that if I'm mistaken. And then the next subcommittee meeting will be April 20th, and we'll be reviewing, continuing the discussion about the FY20 budget, possibly seeing some revisions based on feedback from this meeting.
Perfect. Thank you, Julian. So then we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which is a review and discussion as a possible action on the labor contract for AFSCME Local 1303-345. This contract was provided to the MARB committee ahead of time so that we would give enough time to provide the committee an opportunity to review and potentially see if they would like to take action on this. Based on the timeline, if you choose not to do that, there is a subcommittee meeting, but it would require that we have to have a special meeting. So rather than having a special meeting, I thought that we could at least bring it to your attention, get some overview of this contract with us today. Is the city's legal counsel to be able to provide us with some background. The contract covers, 27 employees for the sewer plant employees, and the contract expires on June 30th of 2020. The tentative agreement ratified by the union on March the 19th, and City Council approved is expected to approve this on April the 12th. MARB does have an opportunity on May the 6th to take action if we choose. The next full MARB meeting will be May the 13th. So therefore, that's why we wanted to bring this to your attention. and I can turn it over to the city and/or your legal counsel. You decide to go through the materials that we have.
I'll start. My name is Chris Hodgson. I'm from Bertram Moses, and I'm the city's labor attorney. Good morning, everyone. We settled a 3-year contract with the AFSCME union to provide for a wage increase of 0% in July 1, 20, a 1% general wage increase July 1, 21, and 2% July 1, 2022. I believe that's consistent with the city's 5-year plan. We also increased premium share effective July 1, 2021 by 1%. That goes to 13%. And by another 1% on July 1, 2022 to 14%. And then we had some language regarding overtime that time work contiguous with the end of the employee's regular shift will be paid for actual time work. So that would not trigger some claim that there could be time and a half due as a callback. So that was the agreement.
Any questions from the members on this contract?
I don't have any questions. This is Sal. I just have a comment. It's consistent with what the other bargaining units received. So,
Thank you for that feedback. And I believe, Julian, didn't we have a very similar contract that we had for West Haven in the past?
And that's probably the contract that Mr. Luciano was referring to. 681 was approved, I want to say September, October timeframe, had the same salary and same progression in the employee health insurance cost share.
Question?
And I want to confirm, I'm pretty sure I know the answer, but that this group is in the city's defined contribution plan. There's no defined benefit pension plan for this group, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and I'm supportive of the contract. I think the wage increases are modest and very reasonable. And I'm happy to see the increase in the premium cost share. I do think the current premium cost share at 12% is on the low side, so I'm happy to see that there is a bump up in that in year 2 and year 3 of the contract, and I certainly can support this contract.
This is Steve Hussinger. I also am in favor of the contract. I think it's a very favorable contract for all. My question is also the contribution, the 12, 13, and 14%. Is that in line with, I know Mr. Luciano mentioned that is that particular part of the contract in line with other contracts in West Haven and the surrounding, maybe some of the surrounding towns? Would Mr. Luciano know that, or have any idea? Is that about where it should be? Comparatively? Well, I'll answer, and then if Mr. Luciano has any thoughts. I believe it is, with respect to the state partnership plan, that the union's agreeing to switch coverage to the state partnership plan involves a reduction in what they're paying in the premium share for the PPO, for example, so that the towns generally are at that 12, 13, 14 that I've seen. And this is consistent with the other bargaining units in the city. Okay, great, thank you.
I have a follow-up question, and I appreciate the context and the comparison with other agreements. What impact, if any, does this agreement have on pension benefits for the members?
There's no change. They continue to get the defined contribution plan.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yeah, that's fine. In examining this, I would suggest, I have no concern about the contract, but if you go through the contract, the positions listed don't match the positions that are outlined in the contract. You need to clean it up. You have 22 people in one area, 23 on another sheet, then there's 27. I assume you're adding 4 positions. The names don't match the information given to MARB. It's just a matter of cleanup. I've seen this in other contracts, especially Hartford's, where they change names and they add positions and they don't transfer or update that into the original contract. So I would encourage both labor and management to go through those sections to make sure that all of the positions match the titles and that the numbers are accurate relative to the amount of people in the unit. Because right now it's off depending upon which page you're looking at. So I would just ask you before it's finally drafted that those be cleaned up a little, if you don't mind. Thank you.
Understood, thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Any other questions? Would we like to take action today? Can we get a motion?
I would make a motion to approve. Sal,
Sal, you're making the motion? Or Tom?
I'll second the motion. Tom.
Thank you. Thank you, Tom. Any other discussion? I don't see any other discussion. Can we get a roll call vote on whether you're in favor, opposed, or you wish to abstain? Julian?
Mr. White?
yes.
Mr. Waxenberg?
Yes.
Mr. Luciano?
Aye.
Mr. Hamilton?
Yes.
Mr. Felsigno? Aye. Mr. Brockman?
Aye.
Ms. Shaw?
Yes.
Ms. Kennison?
Yes.
Are there any other MARB members who have joined the meeting that I did not mention? And that is everybody.
Thank you. The motion has, this contract has been approved. So that is good.
Thank you.
Good day's work. Thank you. The next item on the agenda is to review and discuss the recommended FY22 budget. The subcommittee reviewed that budget in March, and the subcommittee has some recommendations that we have included, that Julian has included in the materials for you today, and with a bit of an overview. A detailed review of the recommended budget also is included in these materials so that the MARB the full MARB board can take a review and get some feedback on their FY22 budget. We then would need to prepare a written synopsis of our MARB feedback back to the city, and then the city will need to respond with the adjustments to the budget, review with the subcommittee again on April the 20th is when we will review this, and include the 5-year plan to the subcommittee for both documents. And the city council then has until May 6th to take action on this budget, and then the full MARB approval for May 13th is the timeline at this time. And Julian, do you want to do highlights, or shall we have the city then go through the budget? High level.
I think the materials in the packet pretty well provided a lot of detail, and I would leave it to the city then to hit the highlights that I might touch on.
Okay, thank you.
Just before we get into the detail, one question. Where's the 5-year plan?
that's going to get provided to the subcommittee, at the next meeting.
That's not a lot of time.
Excuse me?
That's not a lot of time.
I have the model completed, Mr. White. I'm just waiting to hear back. We have been notified of additional pilot funds coming through to the city, but the number I have heard is anywhere between $500,000 to $1.5 million. So I wanted to wait until the subcommittee to drop in that final number if we get it from the state, rather than submit a plan with anywhere from $500,000 to $1.5 million potential gap in it.
No, I appreciate that, Frank, and I appreciate what you've done, but some of the analysis of the budget depends on, the sustainability. We have had some conversations about, breaking up this party and, perhaps having you guys leave our oversight, and that depends on when certain milestones are hit. And that may affect this budget. So my request, subject to the secretary, is that you get that to us as soon as possible in advance of the meeting, and maybe even the full board gets it, just so they can look at it before the 13th.
Understood. As I said, I have the model ready to go. I'm just waiting for the final pilot number to drop in.
Yeah, it's always a problem when you have extra money.
If need be, what I can do is put the model with the low end number in there, and we can always adjust it afterwards.
Yep, that would be good.
Okay, so
Have them give us the number.
yeah. So from the budget, from a high level perspective, I think Julie did a great job of putting together a synopsis of it. We've gone through the various line items. From the revenue perspective, just a couple of changes that we put into this year compared to prior years. In the line item on page 10, recording of legal instrument fees, that is inclusive now of the increased conveyance tax for property sales. So we did put an assumption in there, although it's a low-end conservative assumption. The other major change, as you would have noticed, is that the $2 million of restructuring funds from the state have been removed, and we did put in $1.57 million from the federal relief plan. The mayor has spoken to Senator Blumenthal and had gotten assurances that that money was available and could be used in that particular line item. Everything else on the revenue side, I think you'll see is consistent with prior years. We did drop the assumption around the investment income coming from STIP. As I'm sure you've seen for the current year, that return is nowhere near what it used to be. And we're seeing that all over, not just with the state funds, you're probably seeing it in your personal CDs and money markets as well. From an expenditure side, we did build in a number of new hires into this budget. So we have an additional person, an HR generalist in the personnel department to help shore up that department. That is directly as a result of the HR study that was done and the recommendations of the MARB. In my own department, we're doing some redefining of job descriptions. We're adding an administrative floater, which will spend most of his or her time in the finance department, aiding with the record keeping and the administrative functions around accounts payable, around the purchasing department to help maintain the bids. That, as you recall, was a write-up on a previous audit, so that should clear up that as well. And the individual will also aid with the grants department in maintaining those records and assisting the newly defined position of a junior accountant / grants accountant, whose responsibility will be primarily to ensure that monies spent on various LoCIP projects, federal grants received, private grants, even capital non-recurring, etc., all of that is being accounted for correctly, and all the proper requests are being made back to the state. I think what we've seen in the past is that money has been spent for various projects that have been approved by the state, but never requested back. So the city put the funds out, never requested to get the money back.
Well, not never, not
Well,
timely,
Not on a timely basis. Not since I've been here, actually. So we're hoping that this position, we're expecting this position to be able to satisfy all of those requirements. We have an additional detective coming in for the police department, and just bear with me a second. We had an additional person in the IT department as well. We have a network supervisor in the budget. We did hire an IT manager this year, who started about a month and a half ago. We have a new addition of an IT network supervisor. This individual will aid in the network security, will be on-site 24, well, for lack of a better term, 24/7, right? So on-site, available when needed. That should significantly reduce the city's need for outside consulting as far as the IT budget goes. So overall staffing, we're increasing by 5 heads. As we look through this, I think the mill rate reflects the drop relative to the increased grand list. You'll notice that the tax revenues for fiscal '22 are in line, and in fact slightly higher than the 5-year plan. That is directly contributable to the difference between the $2 million restructuring funds versus the $1.6 million of federal funds. So, as we look through the expenditures, we've gone through the healthcare using both the estimated premium costs that we receive from the state, as well as using the actual projections from Lockton as far as the retirees go. The retiree healthcare, from Lockton's perspective, are growing at double-digit inflation year over year, as opposed to roughly 6.5% to 7% within the partnership plan. So all of that is built in. The debt service was built using the detail from the 5-year capital plan that is included in the budget. So all of the bonding activity in the fiscal '22, $19.7 million, of which the bulk of that is the high school project, 13.5, as well as an additional, an additional $1.8 million for Washington School, which is going to be rebuilt as well. So all of that has gone out to bond advisor and has been returned to us with their projections on what the capital debt service would be. So all in all, I think it's a strong budget. It's a well thought out budget from my perspective, and I think it satisfies the requirements of the city as far as the 5-year capital plan goes. There are no material deviations from that. Some savings that we've seen on the debt service being reinvested in the people. So I think all in all, the city is well on its way to making the structural changes that it needs to do in order to maintain viability. And feasibility. So with that, I will take whatever questions the board has.
I think it would be helpful, Julian, if we just brought to the committee's attention the items that came forth from the subcommittee. One of them that is coming to mind and is the 1.5 million for the one-time funding, the utilization of that money from the American Rescue Plan Act. Part of the discussion that was had at the subcommittee level, as the city is not going to use the $2 million of restructuring fund and replacing it with one-time funding of this grant funds, is that the secretary brought to our attention that she is looking for a contingency plan on that funding, because we do not know if there'll be any restrictions on that funding that's going to come from the federal government. That has not been issued yet, the guidance. That is one of the items that has come out of the subcommittee. You didn't go over Allentown. I know that Allentown's budget was also an item that that we were asking for some changes from the subcommittee. And Julian, can you please help me with the other items that were on that list?
Excuse me, Kim?
So we can bring that to the members. Yes.
I'm sorry, I did forget to mention Allentown.
Okay.
The mayor would like to give you an update.
Yes, Allentown last night, we had expressed the concerns to the city council. They had their budget, one of their budget meetings last night, and so Allentown did transfer and put $350,000, not transfer, that they put $350,000 more against their unfunded pension liability, and they also put $50,000 into OPEB to set up an OPEB trust so that they can start funding OPEB. That then increased the mill rate from 10.91 to 11.62. So there was movement on that, and that satisfied pretty much, I believe, what the committee was looking for.
Keep in mind that mill rate is coming down from 14.2, correct?
14.02.
0.02, and that was built into the plan. So we really need to look at the impact of Allentown as far as not keeping that in a trajectory so that it would continue to increase to deal with the unfunded liabilities. So that was part of the discussion.
No, I understand, but there was a reevaluation, and they had their grand list went up, so we worked with Michael Mylone to try to find, so that, again, we weren't going to leave it for 14.02 with a different grand list. Now, when we did the 5-year plan, as everybody's well aware, we had no way of knowing. We were hoping our grand list would go up, and we're very happy that it did, but it did go up considerably in Allentown. There has been a lot of improvements in construction there.
Okay.
And as far as the number one, which is the city, the contingency plan, I understand if this money wasn't coming, if there wasn't any kind of instructions with it, but there is one instruction that has been held through in anybody's office that I've talked to, and that is COVID funding. And we have in excess of the 1.575 of COVID expenditures in the budget. Not only for FY22, but I've been told that we can use the funding for FY21 as well for certain things, and one of them is COVID expenditures, which we do have quite a bit. In fact, Frank's in the process of aggregating them so that we can take a look at the actual amounts.
So you built in COVID expenditures into the budget, but not the revenue? Is that what you're suggesting?
Right, we didn't put any revenue. No, we put the 1.575 as revenue, but we have COVID expenditures in there as well. And then we have COVID expenditures in the current budget as well.
the American Rescue, I was assuming it's separate funding versus the COVID funding. Are you stating that so we were giving, the state was giving COVID grant funding, is that what you're referring to?
This is the federal. The American Recovery Plan. And as I said, I tried my best to do my due diligence to check with offices, not only with Senator Blumenthal, Senator Murphy, Rosa DeLaura's office. We actually had a presentation from our treasurer the other night at one of the meetings. And although some of the stuff is vague right now, they say that there will be a lot more direction coming very, very soon. And the money is supposed to hit shortly. It's not supposed to wait. It's supposed to be within 60 days. And they're making it sound like it may even be sooner, that half of the money will be coming to the city of West Haven, which would be $9 million for that. Additionally, we did not take into consideration the distressed municipality funding, which is 4.9, I believe, and we did not take into consideration the change in the pilot, the restructuring and the tiered pilot now. We did not put that in, and the reason we didn't put those two in is because that was the only funding that the secretary said, do not use any of it in the budget, and we did not use any of it in the budget.
Right, because the state budget has to be approved first.
Correct. And that's the other thing, and hopefully Julian can help us with this, because we're getting numbers all over the place from, like Frank said, $500,000 to 1.7, so we don't even know what's possibly on the table. Not that we're putting it in, but it'd be nice to know.
I don't have those answers at this very moment, so if we did, we would definitely share them.
Okay, well, thank you.
And so the secretary still requested a contingency, so I don't want to take that off the mark. And that is one of the items of the follow-up item.
Could I just make a comment, or maybe this is maybe a suggestion to Frank, and I don't know, we're all sort of waiting for guidance on how we're supposed to be using this American Rescue Plan Act funding and how we need to account for it. But one of my assumptions, frankly, down here at least, is that we would need to account for that in a separate special revenue fund as opposed to throwing it in the general fund. Now, I may be wrong about that, and maybe it'll be perfectly fine to have it in the general, in as a general fund revenue, but you may want to consider particularly if you've got one-time expenses that are sort of baked into your budget that you're going to reasonably be able to say these are somehow COVID-related or pandemic-related or related to recovery from the pandemic, sort of strip those out of your general fund, move them off into a special revenue fund budget for American recovery, and then put the revenue over in your special revenue fund. I mean, that was how I was expecting to need to deal with it here. So I'm just throwing that out as a possible suggestion, because you might run into some issues about dropping it in as a general fund revenue, because then you can't really say it's used for this specific purpose.
Yeah, you're absolutely...
Thank you, Tom.
I'm sorry, Kim. I was going to say, you're absolutely right. We've had those conversations, the assistant finance director and I, along those exact same lines of taking the funds, the funds and whatever expenditures we've identified, putting them in a separate fund, and then as needed, draw down to either cover, if it's permitted for capital projects or whatever, to divvy it out that way. But I'm in absolute agreement. I don't believe that if the city is receiving $9 million or, $18 million, whatever it is, I wouldn't expect to drop that into the general fund.
Why not?
Who said that?
Who said that?
Wasn't me.
That was our bankruptcy expert.
Should I make a request, Kim?
Yes, Julian, please.
As part of the follow-up, could you, by the subcommittee meeting, just break out what the related expenses you were anticipating would be I know we don't have firm guidance yet, but what you were anticipating would be eligible uses that are currently embedded in the expenditure side of the budget, then we can at least sort of match the 1.5 million in revenue to what you anticipated being able to, charge off to that. If you were to actually have to move it into a special revenue fund, as Tom suggested, and just being able to kind of match the dollars.
Sure, we can take a stab at that.
Thanks.
That's where I was going with your expenditures when you had said that they were already baked in. So that I think is definitely necessary. And Tom, thank you for your input and feedback and guidance. I think that should be included in one of the follow-up items from the MARB. Any other discussion here about the budget?
The one other item that
Mark, are you speaking? You're on mute, Mark.
Yeah, the Board of Education budget is funded.
Is what funded?
Yes, sir, Board of Education.
My assumption is that they will get increases in state aid and federal funding, so some funding is on the local side, but they will still be getting monies on the state and federal side for increases of.
That is correct, sir.
Just like with Matt Board of Ed, yes, we will make up the difference between the state aid and federal funding.
So we have requested from the Board of Ed, Mark, to provide us with the grossed up numbers, including for the Board of Ed, to include the grant funding and the grant expenditures, so that this way we're not just looking at the flat funding, we can look at the whole Board of Ed as a whole. And, because the grant is not solid yet and it's anticipated, we still want to move forward because it then has an effect on what we look at when we get to the subcommittee.
Okay, very good, thank you.
Other questions?
Not a question, I just wanted to point out, and I did send that back a week ago with the letter, that I know that there was a request for the mill rates for the fire departments, and I pointed out the timelines that we won't have those. In fact, 2 of the budgets aren't even done yet. Allingtown's all set, but the other 2 districts aren't, and the West Shore district won't have their definite mill rate until it's voted on Memorial Day weekend, so that is like June. So we can, I don't even have an estimate for either one of them right now. Center District, we should know on May the 4th, they have their meeting then, and they vote on the mill rate. But as far as West Shore, that will be through Memorial Day before we have a definite on whether or not their mill rate was accepted.
Can I make a suggestion?
Sure.
Tim?
Yeah.
Maybe because I know that the timelines don't work out in terms of having adopted or even proposed mill rates from the independent districts, but if we had a table that stacks up the general fund mill rate and then as proposed with the existing mill rates for the fire districts, and then alongside that sort of another scenario. Michael Mylon has done a lot of detailed analysis on the impacts of the reval. If we could get perhaps what the independent district mill rates would be after just adjusting for reval, just so that we can get a complete picture. We know it'll be very preliminary in nature because we don't have proposed mill rates from the fire districts yet, but it'll at least kind of give us some point of reference, if that's possible.
That's a good suggestion.
Julian, or Kim, if I could just add one thing to that. Mayor had asked me to sit down with the 2 fire districts and basically take them through the whole revaluation analysis we did with the general fund. So we're going to do that tomorrow, and my hope is that early next week we could at least develop what Julian had mentioned, and that is at least an aggregate gross mill rate showing the impact of the city's taxes, the fire district's taxes, and a ballpark of what the range might be in terms of where the two fire districts end up. But we should be able to get that to you by next week, I think. Again, not finalized, but at least a general idea of totality, the tax impact.
Okay, thank you, Michael. Anything else, Julian?
No, not on that.
Okay. Anything else regarding the budget from the members? Julian, do you have the list of the other recommendations that came out of the subcommittee that we can just mention? Besides the Allentown and besides the one-time funding? I know it's the five-year plan,
Yeah, those two items were specific suggestions. Then the other items on this summary were sort of observations, suggestions.
Okay.
And follow-up items.
Okay.
So we had, we need to get prior year actuals and current year projections built into the budget tables, the five-year plan, as we mentioned. As soon as we can get that, and we'll get that out in advance to the full board if we, so they have additional time to look at that. An update on the consolidation of the pension fund investments that was discussed. We were told that the RFP for that was already out. And then we just talked about the district mill rates and sort of a remind. I think it's more of a reminder than anything else
back to me with the reporting.
We should be seeing an updated pension valuation, at least for the
pension. I'm waiting for Doug to get set up.
For the city as a whole is on the same cycle or not. I don't think it is. We should be getting an updated pension valuation probably late spring, summer timeframe that then reflects the new mortality tables and a revised discount rate. Those are just some of the things that kind of popped up in the discussion and the debriefing.
Thank you, that's helpful for the MARB. So if we have no other questions about the budget for FY '22, then I'm going to move on to the next item of the agenda.
Okay, so you've all received the financial summary.
Monthly.
Yep, so you received the financial summary. Revenues, as you recall, last month, the tax revenues were well under the prior year due to the snowstorm that occurred and closing banks and City Hall on January 31st. You'll see that, as I mentioned last month, they are back in line again. The tax collection rate is at 95.9% compared to 96 and change in the prior year. So we are back on track. The tax department has begun the lien process. Liens have been identified. Notices are going out. So we expect that process to continue with the sale of the liens probably happening somewhere in the May timeframe. Moving forward with that. On the expenditure side, I'm not seeing anything major. As the mayor had indicated, I have sent out a notice to all the department heads to make sure that before the end of this month, I want the full 9 months of any COVID-related overtime, actual expenditures, etc., identified, so I can move them out of their individual departments and into the account that we have set up in the other/contingency area. There has been some costs moved out already, but I have asked them for that by the end of the month, and then on an ongoing basis, I'd like to get that from them so that we can move it on a monthly basis. So that will aid in my cost projections as we get closer to the year. From the sewer department, so as of right now, I have taken down the cost expectations around the healthcare based on where we are seeing it run. I expect to be able to drop that expense estimate further over the next month or two, once I see what the current periods are coming in at. But, so that has been reflected. We have dropped the debt service number to match what the official debt obligations for the year are going to be. That was $200,000. And you can see on page 8 of the financials, I have added a line and broken out of the contingency area the COVID-related expenses that had previously caused some confusion and some questions relative to why the other / contingency was so far out of whack compared to budget. So those are COVID expenses that have been identified so far. Once I get the estimates and the numbers in from the department heads, as I said, that number will change. The sewer fund is on track. I am projecting a $250,000 roughly surplus for the year. That maintains, at this point, that maintains the bulk of the contingency in there. Should it not be needed, you could see that line item on page 11 would generate additional surpluses to the West Haven Sewer Fund. So no surprises there. As far as Allentown goes, we are still seeing the overruns in the personnel costs. That's the overtime. Just as with the police department, as I mentioned last month, with police and fire, if one of those individuals is out on quarantine, we cannot leave that shift unmanned. So there is significant overtime in both the police and fire departments related to the pandemic. And I've asked the chief for his projections on that. What we could do is see if there are any funds left for the city that could be applied to that. So as we get closer to the year, we should be able to get a better handle on that. But at this point, no real surprises. Things seem to be, knock wood, improving as far as processes go. So the projections are getting cleaner. You'll see that we did make a change to the Board of Education forecast, and thank you to Matt for being able to provide that. So they are currently estimating $125,000 surplus to come back to the city for the year. So if there are any questions from the board, I'll happy to entertain them.
Yeah, thank you for breaking out and noticing that we're going to have a surplus, Matt. I know that you are conservative. In looking at the numbers, I'm thinking that we're still on a conservative side.
We are. Oh.
Even with the 125 on the Board of Ed.
Yes, we're definitely still being conservative. As I said at the last meeting, we're still planning on extending the school day before the end of the year. So some additional expenses will have to be made for that. The plan is not set in stone yet, so once that is, I'll be able to be a little more realistic with where we're going to be at the end of the year. And the one thing I'd just like to highlight is our health insurance. For a number of years, it has run extremely under budget. We're not seeing that at this point this year. February was an extremely high month in claims. So it's something that I am looking at, but I don't think it will be detrimental to our overall budget.
Any questions from the Board members? I had one question just from the from the sewer, and that's when you look at the budgeting, and I know that you're going forward with your proposed budget for the new year, and you compare it to the actuals and the trends of the actuals. I'm just wondering if the budget, if they're just really like rolling forward the budget versus looking at what your expenditure trend is, because at the end of the year, it looks as if some of these lines could be readjusted. I don't know if you provide any input to this, or you just get the information, Frank?
We just get the information. That budget is approved and generated by the sewer commission.
Okay.
But the fund has generated surpluses in the past few years.
Right.
We are expecting to have some significant capital requirements relative to the sewer lines. You can see on page 123 of the budget. That's the 5-year capital plan. In the grants and other sources, we do have a placeholder in there for the outflow pipe. And the entire project is expected to be, north of $33 million. So.
In addition to that, Kim, Lieutenant, we're under an EPA consent decree, and they mandate they mandate a pretty high surplus that we retain until we're out of that consent decree.
How long is that, do you know?
Well, it's at least another year, possibly 18 months.
Okay. Okay. All right. No other questions? Then we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, and thank you, City of West Haven. Appreciate your time and joining us today and bringing the MARB up to date. The next item is the City of Hartford, and we have provided
We gotta get these things turned.
If we had the luxury, it would be good to listen to that, but.
Can I just turn this off?
Yeah, there's a switch on the,
Underneath. Yeah.